royal watchers are stunned as shocking news emerges. Prince Harry is reportedly furious after the UK government blocked a $40 million payout from Princess Diana's legacy charity. This stunning development raises serious questions about royal finances, political influence, and the legacy of Diana's work. Let's dive into the explosive details behind this dramatic turn. Like many good stories, it all started with a mother's love. Princess Diana, a woman for every breath of the world, always breathed beyond the majestic walls of Buckingham Palace. She was a lone quasar in an Arctic aurora family, a voice for compassion among the folds of Marlism at her hearth. Most of all, she was a tenacious mother to two young boys, determined to teach them not by force of government, but with empathy and respect that the world could be navigated with such attitudes instead of mere duty. So what happens when this hallowed heritage, saturating through her compassion, worldwide works and display of resistance and grace, is strangled with controversy? How does an idealistic girl who once loved nothing more than her son now confront his opposition to everything she held sacred? What kind of government steps in to protect her reputation, not to remember her? Before we proceed, go ahead and like and subscribe to the channel while you are at it, and turn on notifications so you get notified when I release more stuff. It has sent shockwaves through the monarchy and a global audience who have seen Prince Harry journey from a grieving young boy, walking behind his mother's coffin, to a man trying to rewrite his destiny, and perhaps that of his mother as well. And so, after months of simmering tensions and whispered concerns, Harry has truly been thrown into the storm. A $40 million payout from the Diana Legacy Trust, designed to continue the work of the late Princess of Wales, is said to have been put on hold by the UK government. In it, reference was made to a series of potential irregular financial connections between Harry's Archewell Foundation and the charitable trust scenarios that are explosive, in high dudgeon and liable to have any number of searingly emotional conclusions in the mind of the outside onlooker. Just more of a royal fallout to rival the ongoing feud between the Sussexes and the Crown? Yet, for the keen-eyed viewer, this transcends that. This is not about a purse, this gets into the history, stewardship, and rightful keeper of Princess Diana's legacy. Behind the scenes, sources close to the inquiry say Prince Harry has pledges to provide $40 million for humanitarian work related to archway projects that first appeared with an ambition to land grant on innocent ground but has been a hair's breadth from falling through. But as regulatory interest in the scheme increased, so did evidence that there were alarming aspects to it: loose project description, enmeshed commercially driven consulting contracts, and blurred lines between public charity and private entrepreneurship. Prince Harry is said to be furious, blindsided, and feeling let down by the authorities, with his payment on hold and an official investigation now underway. How can it happen to a soldier, a grandson, or a prince? What a grim rejoinder to the memory of one of the most beloved women in modern history. Harry and Will are not alone in brands or foundations that are being scrutinized as part of a possible misallocation scandal. Why is he depicting it not as a scandal but like the most atrocious personal bereavement? This story is not just about money, it's also about what happens when a son tries to embody his mother's spirit in the only way he knows possible and the world questions whether or not that intention exists. Let's pause for a moment. After her death, a body called the Diana Legacy Trust was formed. All going to the various causes that she loved: landmine clearance, HIV/AIDS awareness, homelessness, and mental health. The fund was grown over the years by trustees who have been committed to upholding Diana's humanitarian vision, not as a token, but as a live and breathing mission, she said. The allocation of the funds had long been a topic of discreet discussion between Prince William and Prince Harry. There was always a clear boundary, though, between the royal family and their own money and fundraising on behalf of the trust. This became blurred even further, according to investigators, when Harry moved from royal duties into his private life. The establishment of Arch, the organization Harry and Meghan founded, represented a bold new chapter, a foundation that would encapsulate their values as individuals, their independence and commitment to helping others. As Arch was nothing to do with the monarchy, unlike traditional royal duties. It functioned as a for-profit company that seamlessly integrated charity with entertainment, media content creation, and consulting. While the goals were widely heralded as noble, there was grumbling from within that such lofty intentions suffered as a result of being unattached to a clear charge. As requests for funding began to pop up, the concern increased. People connected to Arch submitted funding requests for a multi-year grant of $40 million to form part of a multimedia message and mental health program and global outreach campaign, according to documents seen by senior charity regulators. The documents were beautifully drafted, in professional language. When analysts attempting to trace where the money could go hit all these LLCs, entertainment subsidiaries, consulting groups or other intercepts, attendants, on what amounts to a company in the vast business of Meghan and Harry, they positioned themselves behind several barriers. In the end, is successfully answered more questions than we probably knew existed. An internal compliance officer raised questions surrounding Archwell's financial history and work with commercial media outlets, according to government sources. Later investigations would show that some of the recommended vendors and project managers were connected to ostensibly money-making opportunities attached to the duo's name. Given the potential risk to the reputation of the trust, the review team also advised DCMS to stop payment in order to investigate further and let Sussex's legal team know. His remarks prompted Harry to break his silence and say that he was irritated and took it personally. As sources revealed, he did not just regard the hold-up as a bout of bureaucratic meddling but even as a betrayal of his relationship with Diana and her memory. They could not believe the country his mother loved so much would turn their back on her family in such a cold way. Yet the government grandstanding that the role of the trust is to deliver a legacy living memorial to Princess Diana, not one which maintains public interest for its own sake, definitely set out what appears as an irresolvable tension between maintaining a legacy with feeling and preserving it for safeguarding from exploitation. Each side of this deeply emotional and what has become a profoundly complicated story feels they are the ones who are being respectful to Diana. Harry then sees himself as continuing and modernizing the mission, using celeb media power to help it go global. But on the flip side, people who are defenders of Diana's legacy think that they are shielding her name from being dragged into these sort of rows. Diana could scarcely have imagined that such tired, tawdry games would still be played with her posthumous legacy by then, and certainly not about who would or wouldn't get to claim proximity to it. Prince Harry must feel isolated, resentful and under siege, emerging from the post-royal calm into a very media storm indeed, with the future of Archwell either at stake or with legions ready to rally to his flag, depending who tells the tale. The critique heated up after leaks hinted at financial connections between Archwell and commercial enterprises like Netflix. Although Archwell's PR team attempted to play down its handling of and the decision-making regarding the couple's transparent work for free, the effect was clear. It had gone from Prince Harry, keeping Diana's memory alive, to Prince Harry, being creative with the lines for personal reasons. For a lot of royal watchers, this was a major moment because it revealed that even the son of Diana would be called upon to answer for how he fits into her legacy, no matter his titles or trials. It is an unfolding tale likely to become one of the most emotionally charged in royal history, with Harry's name, Diana's memory, and a $40 million question on the line. But the real question goes deeper than questions of money, foundations, and scandal. That is, what would Princess Diana say if she was in the middle of this chaos today? What path would she choose? Well, you may be in for a surprise by the answer. One has to go back to the inception of the Diana Legacy Trust to appreciate the full emotional weight this ongoing sequence carries. It has nothing to do with paperwork and financial documents or tax filling, but in its very deep spiritual dimension. After all, this was not just a nice thing to do. It was an incarnation of Diana's compassion, a vow written in the hearts of millions that her tragic death would not spell the end of the fight she chose. Her kindness, her proactivism, they would live on, not in memory alone but in deeds. When Diana died in 1997, the whole of Britain felt bereft. This was not about subjects mourning a member of royalty, it was closer to family. The carpets of flowers that littered Kensington Palace, the spontaneous candlelit vigils and tears in the eyes of strangers who would never meet her. You could tell that Diana had touched an important nerve, one of humanity. They had felt seen by her, and when she was gone it hit deep. There was more than a little grief, but also a question that weighed heavy. And how could it be asked for one to maintain that kind of essence in a world that so quickly spun itself out from the forge of bereavement and resolution? It was this that precipitated the originally generous wave of donations when she died, and hence the Diana Legacy Trust. The Trust's central remit was obvious: to extend Diana's charitable work. But more than that, it carried with it an unspoken obligation to protect her name from being taken in vain. It was conceived as the conscience of a woman who, in this life and after it, exceeded all institutions. The trust was carefully constructed, consisting of experienced philanthropists, legal advisors, and those who had direct involvement with Diana's humanitarian work, such as landmine clearance, a crusade that seemed to have escalated in the days leading up to her death. Those key causes that gained ongoing support included landmine clearance, mental health advocacy, HIV/AIDS initiatives, education, and programs to benefit disaffected populations, particularly children. That wasn't just rhetoric but the guts of her public work. What made the trust unique was its tight terms. It could only be deployed for general royal expenses, political and personal purposes. These steps were viewed as protections, regardless of intended guidelines and even if no family links. They were meant to safeguard the charity from the whims of royal machinations and to preserve Diana's legacy, rather than have it hawked or exploited as nothing more than a PR device. The trust remained discreet and effective for many years, but with dignity as the central driver. The trust was steered by Princes William and Harry not for profit but to follow their mother's example. Then both 18, they had just begun to offer ideas on projects that would celebrate the lasting legacy of Princess Diana and appeal to young people. They were simultaneously respectful, restrained, and utterly traumatic. Trustee accounts remembered times the brothers became visibly emotional when reading over new projects tied to their mother's legacy. They said it was more than just paperwork, but about taking the time to honor her memory. But the two brothers started walking different paths with time. But William stuck dutifully with his regal role, low profile as it was in the trust. He would sporadically plug projects, show up at launch events and back some ventures which fit the bill of his own public face. Meanwhile, Harry took another course, one of self-liberation after years struggling to be his own man while expected also to conform, and eventually made the grounding decision not just to step back from royal life altogether. It was a parting of ways that sparked debate about whether Harry's media-focused, commercially driven and financially independent new ventures could maintain any legacy of Princess Diana. Would pulling out of the institution release them from that moral high ground in support of Diana's mission as well? At the outset of Archewell's creation, this line of questioning was somewhat ignored by the trust. The trust did not intervene, cautiously respectful to this. But behind the scenes, it was a powder keg. Some trustees worried the relationship with Archewell could muddy the waters even more if pursued as a formal financial arrangement. They knew Archewell was bigger than just non-profit. It was art and content creation, media storytelling, wellness offerings, for-profit consulting. This dual nature really complicated the due diligence process. The trust, however, were always prepared to give Harry the benefit of the doubt. The warning lights went off, however, when many of the formal funding requests began to look suspiciously like transfer agreements, not for profit, but not so charitable partnerships columns up on a whiteboard. An internal communication seems to have indicated that these proposals did not adequately distinguish between public service and brand building. One unnamed trustee said it felt like we were being asked to commercialize Diana's death. But the board was most troubled by the risk of damage to Diana's name in public. That sacred, almost mythic memory of Diana could now be sucked into the whirl of fame and commerce that followed so soon on the heels of Harry and Meghan. The Diana Legacy Trust had always been an emblem of purity and sincerity in its mission. It kept a low profile with no spectacular events or appeal campaigns, concentrating on the necessary but low-key task of providing humanitarian assistance in country. The official press release refused to provide Harry with the $40 million for his work and instead found its way into the hands of journalists, ready-made for a scandal that was or would be royal, and losing their jobs without delicately revering the death of the woman whose tragic demise gave birth to the trust. And the reaction was quick and mixed. To some it represented a betrayal. How could the government refuse to give Diana's son access to his mother's legacy, they asked, while others considered it an important gesture of accountability. How could pound millions be gifted to an organization so entrenched with commercial interests? But what is frequently overlooked in the debate is the effect this has on those inside the trust who had, and still have, a personal relationship with Diana. The real work comes from the many who have toiled beside her, those she who joined in meetings, went along on field visits or saw her genuine compassion for both victims and delight in children. When Atomi left graduation day, so did they, she entrusted them as administrators of life and truth. More honestly, in hysterical off-the-record conversation one trustee said, "It's not that we don't like Harry, it's about saving Diana." The heart of the dilemma more than some point of finance or legal matter. It doesn't pit governance against a mourning son. Instead, this section of the narrative focuses on maintaining the heart and soul of Diana's legacy. Power and desire pivot against each other in the story of opposing loves, convinced that they know how to best serve the same woman. But they disagree on what she would have wanted. So, how would Diana have seen Arch? Maybe she would have celebrated her son turning into a Hollywood-like persona, an icon? Would she have signed off on the media deals, the Netflix docuseries and those jaw-dropping tell-all interviews? Or would she have hidden from the media spotlight? So, all of the business partnerships and the blending of feelings in commerce makes us uneasy. A line has been drawn and it is clear, the legacy of Diana that once united those closest to her, is the thing most driving them apart. The Diana Legacy Trust was never supposed to be a battlefield. Still, we are in a time where her name is headlining events, and it's one of those times when her son is on the outside wanting to come in. When they revealed their plans in announcement early last year, the call to step away from senior royals was a shock around the globe. Scandal, modernization and even war had not toppled the British monarchy in centuries, but this exit was unprecedented. This was no exile, it wasn't no blasted retreat. This was an abdication of sorts, a duke and duchess flouncing off to new lives free of the constraints of traditional royal life, in search of peace above all counsel. However, peace was elusive and freedom carried a heavy price as they made their way to North America. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex set tongues wagging with speculation over their next moves. Would they pen memoirs? Or would they do speaking tours? Or would they withdraw, as some of them had wished to? And so, perfectly on time once again we have the answer in true Greek naming fashion, with Archie being named to evoke source of action, and that this is an action driven through love and service. The Archwell Foundation was not built to be a simple charity but an innovative fusion of humanitarianism with storytelling, health spa culture and wellness technology and media creation. It made a bid for just that, as the couple, undeniable and poignant in their ambition, began to take over. But in discussions Harry clarified that Archwell was a platform for minority voices, a landing pad to breed compassion to unite and heal the deep societal wounds, and also underpin causes closest to their hearts. Meghan spun it as an avenue for optimism, growth, and compassion. It was a bold vision articulating legacy, compassion, and mission reinvented for today. Beneath the engineered branding, smoothed over press releases, and Instagram-filtered goodwill was a sense of gamble. Digitized documents describe the Archwell entity as a complex with a non-profit foundation and an additional layer of for-profit arms that included Arch Audio, Arch Productions Incorporated, alongside other entities organized under a profit-making umbrella that was deemed necessary to enter into commercial partnerships, licensing agreements, or to raise investments. This was no ordinary charity a la the Prince's Trust and the Diana Legacy Trust. It was a new, hybrid way of being modern and daringly unconventional. They were trying to strike a philanthropic and commercial balance, but with that a target on their back in addition to plaguing headlines, family grudges, and many hardships along the way, especially for Harry. The Sussex vision for Archewell seemed unable to materialize in isolation as they had envisaged. So deeply personal was Archewell for him, spurred by his need to honor his mother in his own way and not as the monarchy wished to define it. Analysts questioned the dual nature of Archewell as both a non-profit and commercial. It was questioned how a platform making Netflix documentaries, Spotify podcasts, and branded content could ever be anything but self-serving dressed as philanthropy. The sense of vagueness around this led to concerns being raised among commentators as well as within the charity sector, with some viewing Archewell as a possible disruptor in the making, not just for its impact on established norms but also fear that it might compromise transparency and trust in the long run. The Sussexes had a slew of partnerships lined up within the first few months alone. Notable deals included a reported $100 million multiple-year contract with Netflix as well as a multi-million-dollar multi-year agreement with Spotify, books, speaking and consulting. People either applauded the couple for using their power to make an independent living, or people thought they'd be opportunist while doing somehow a good deed. The blending of messages from Archewell's non-profit interests and the Sussexes' commercial ones led to a complex situation. One possible approach, for example, would see Archewell launch a mental health initiative at the same time Meghan was plugging a podcast series made by their commercial arm on that subject. Despite the similarities in values between their two messages, having a dual agenda went against that. That ambiguity helped to fuel the making of a brand that was itself unclear on whether it was a brand or a charitable cause. It is in the same line that Harry is said during this time to have been drawing strength from his mother's legacy, which he may have seen as a source of assets as well as some emotional support. Sources close to the Diana Legacy Trust revealed there had been some early low-key discussions from Harry's side, with ideas on ways Archewell could work with Diana's projects and ensuring her work is brought more up-to-date in a digital era and cross-platform approach. The idea of the commodification of Diana's legacy might sound sensible on paper, but talk about money really changes the nature of what was proposed to the Diana Legacy Trust. In this role, Diana worked on different projects, from documentary series to short-form educational content and cause-based campaigns. In order to make these dreams a reality, she approached the trust for funding and would use Archewell's production facilities and media partners. But the trustees had a problem within themselves. Though the concepts were compelling and the missions aligned, questions loomed regarding content ownership, revenue split, and payday for Archewell. It was not a skeptical question, more of due diligence. The emotional wallop and the idea of continuing Diana's mission worldwide with her son were certainly intriguing, even if there remained some nagging doubts about how everything would come together. Governing a charity requires clarity, and also in emerging terms that was the tug-of-war between the hybrid nature of Archewell. The foundation was a tangled web, not the simple path that it should have been. No single false move, no attempt at abuse, however unintended, had the capacity uniquely to damage the reputation of the Diana Trust, itself a part of that legacy it set out to protect. Despite this, Harry appeared determined. Archewell was more than a business to him, it was a way through which he could heal. It was his form of turning pain into purpose, a way to make out of the sadness he felt for losing his mom something beautiful. But it was frustrating and disheartening for Harry to see how easy things changed, simply because others will not understand that such processes are terribly personal. He felt angry at the same time he was hurt that they doubted his intentions. At times in private he confided he could not believe he was Diana's son. That this somehow meant and that such he should protect her legacy. But here he was, being treated like an outsider, a man with no record of violating the laws that would even give an application for asylum in response to him. To him, the treatment was a betrayal of his birthright, although not in the trust's specific concerns. But no, the focus was borders. The trust didn't doubt Harry's intentions but rather the way in which he planned to convey those. Can they truly fork over big money into a venture that could be seen as cashing in on Diana's name, extra publishers? Were they at risk of a public backlash, suggesting that the memory of Diana was being exploited for gain by her own son? End of discussion that the trustees grew nervous about, until they balked, not to punish Harry or because they conceived of Archewell as nefarious, but because a line separating homage from business had been smudged beyond recognition. The refusal was a turning point for Archewell, but it represented an even more significant moment in Harry's royal exit. Harry was said to have been resolute in the days that followed. He understood the rejection, then, as another in a series, the latest iteration of an unrelenting world that would not even sanction his escape from royal standards while condemning him for trying. Again, Diana had done all this before, but her memory was as divisive now as ever. The rollout of Archewell was designed to represent a fresh start, the bridge to breaking out of royal life while honoring its most important attributes. Yet it was fast becoming a lightning rod, where the individual disclosures of people met with endemic controversies. Archewell is a name that combines an ancient word for strength and action, and another that evokes charity from deep within one's soul. Archewell 101/ at its core, Archewell was born out of a desire to honor the impact both the Duke and Duchess recognize can have with just one word archetypes of compassion and welfare that shows they are part in future plans to exist from all realms. But in a world of skepticism, where every movement is monitored and every financial transaction is questioned, even the best purpose can be looked at with an evil eye. At first read, the proposal seems to lug around its legacy and rather alarmingly preachy prose, a wonderfully composed, heartfelt however not quite hitting the nail on the head document. Their disquiet grew, however, when the trustees of the Diana Legacy Trust began looking into Prince Harry's formal funding application for which they could find no legitimate purpose. An unsolicited, below-the-fold proposal passed to Politico from the private side, and prepared by senior advisors reporting to Archewell's C-suite and to committee presumably helped with outside consultants said Ingle is feasible for maybe even a $40 mil plus raise. The sum was not going to be handed out all at once, but in multiple tranches over a 3-year duration. This was aimed to underpin a set of humanitarian media projects, global mental health programs and diversity storytelling initiatives that uphold the values which were at Diana's core, according to an objective outlined. The tribute from a few of the board, and the sales job from others. The initial synopsis featured several projects focusing on a few of Diana's renowned charities including HIV/AIDS awareness, women's empowerment, landmine clearance, and mental health activism. The grand vision of high-quality documentaries with celebrity-led campaigns, global workshops and immersive storytelling experiences would be launched simultaneously all over the world. However, the proposal reportedly was unclear when the board asked for specifics such as financials and vendors or media assets owned. Described as goopy in tone and emotional, but more aspirational than practical and specific, a board member said the content was both highly emotionally resonant, yet also structurally incomplete. This is a fairly frequently mentioned in the executive summary, but operations of the projects left many questions unanswered, including where did Diana go? What about those who would manage the end product? In the remnants of profits are some generated by commercial, media content, where would those go? How would project leads be identified, and might such people had connections with other Archewell-affiliated for-profit ventures and been motivated to participate in a lucrative ICO? By no means were these questions unimportant. As the Diana Legacy Trust was a UK-registered charity, it has to fall in line with some of the most strict charity statutes on the planet and is overseen by Charity Commission. Money was tight, and every dime spent had to be accounted for. With a high-profile donor, The trust had been a model of how to run legacy charities well within their value guidelines, but dealing with requests potentially in the dozens of millions and facing potential conflicts from an unaccustomed matter when clear-cut business are muddled by participants with business interests that straddle commercial and charitable. But that optimism began to wane as additional documentation arrived, or more concretely, failed to arrive. Even some trustees who wanted to believe a partnership could work with the proper tweaks and a better delineation of resources told me they needed serious convincing at that point in June. Further, sources claimed that during the review process of the proposals it was found that some relevant provisions were missing. What bothered Hogan was not having more granularity on individual third-party vendors. Many of the budget line items were labeled at a high level, as production support, strategic partnerships, and community amplification, but none are named which companies would be involved. At a later date, follow-up documents reportedly contain even vaguer language when the trust asked for clarification. The lack of clarity gave regulators pause, but so did the pattern. Independent analysts employed to check the fund request apparently found that various destined for merchants, related as far as media battles were concerned, were connected to business event organizations which had recently worked with the couple's Netflix bargain. Meanwhile, the other company said to be under consideration as a wellness partner was in the process of launching a new consumer brand that was also going to put an emphasis on mindfulness products. A range of private backers was said to have backed this brand, including a repeat financier in Arch Wells' U.S. endeavors. What started as an altruistic effort was starting to look more like a financial and brand partnership, mixing goodwill with commercialism. None of those web links were necessarily illegal, but they raised enough questions to warrant a deeper look. The potential that the money set aside to honor Princess Diana might end up wending its way into anything with even modest profit potential just made trustees wary of the whole thing. This, in turn, led to rapid escalation in tension. The next week, the trustees' lawyers reported their concerns to the UK Charity Commission and supplied them with confidential memos and segments of the proposals that were causing alarm. While the Commission did not open a formal investigation, it is understood to have placed a compliance warning flag on file, urging care and requesting further documentation in connection to any payouts related to Arch. It was at this point the mood shifted. According to sources close to the situation, Harry had expected a favorable reaction to the idea and did not consider it so much as a favor as simply part of bringing Diana's success into the world. He did not view Arch well as just another brand. He visualized it as a modern iteration of his mother's legacy, with the resources, visibility, and ambitions. What could be preventing the trust from getting a partner? But what Harry perhaps failed fully to appreciate, or else just discounted, was the extent to which it had also armored itself against anything that could truly hurt its public image. It had prided itself since its inception on being uncluttered by court politics, turning down offers from recognized bodies in the past if they felt it did not look quite right. Now, though, it was faced with its most emotionally charged plea yet. Things were further complicated by the spread of rumors of internal squabbling. Certain trustees reportedly favored teaming up with Arch in a scaled-down version of the deal, which would entail providing a smaller grant with tighter controls on output and independent production. Others, meanwhile, were stout-hearted in their opposition to any funding going out the door. With an absence of financial transparency, considered by many to be a sine qua non, it put not just the trust's external standing at risk but also its internal unity. Harry's supporters, in the meantime, were getting more and more restless. The impulse to clarify things was reportedly met with legalese, and aides clamored for the opportunity to make their case in private. While Meghan was said to have been much quieter about the subject when in the public eye, she was also said to be supportive but wary and told Harry as long as he entered into it with confidence, rather than aggressively, then go for it. That the chances of a big payout and attendant problems were reported to the UK government after the damage was done. A consensus among regulators was also reached, halting all fund transfers in a long-term basis. More investigation was needed before the frozen payout could start. What should have been a tribute to a mother remembered has turned into the stuff of a modern scandal. To Harry, the $40 million was not about money, it was about what this number stands for in his life, and he will cherish the memories thereof forever. It was symbolic of the fact that he remained Diana's son, and also has become one with her in spirit. The bureaucratic denial was also a slight, one that was felt professionally and personally as stripping not just of the reliant funds for prophecy, but of himself. Sources have told VF that the prince seemed to see the block as inconceivable, the same trust that national grief and mother love had built up transforming into a barrier, preventing him from further extending his mother's welcome hand. For Harry, the obstruction was cold and a deeper betrayal, although in trust still stood. The resulting piece stated that he was not being targeted, but rather the processes surrounding Harry were. They argued that Arch, no ordinary charity, they said, fell outside that model because of its combination of branding, clout, revenue, potential and global profile required unyielding oversight. Even as that grief was cloaked by the legal system and hollow statements, there existed a heavy mutual sadness. Reportedly agonizing over their decision, the trustees, many of whom held a deep affection for Diana in her lifetime and had worked tirelessly to protect her legacy in death, took the highly unusual step of removing one exhibitor from an exhibit they were putting on themselves. Some even said they had not slept or been close to tears at emotional boardroom meetings. No one had wanted to be in a position of turning down Diana's boy. But they thought it was needed. To give in without clear evidence would compromise the sanctity of the trust. It was never supposed to be a means of familial control, an alternative to public service. The scene had not been laid rest, it was shaped into a confrontation between Harry on one side of scrounging door, leaden heart set and the rest behind. Insulation not mere monies, but the family history. At the time the British government was involved in an issue related to one of the royals with a charity, and there was an air of tension. A quiet whisper within the elegant chambers of the trustees became an issue of public concern, financial accountability and national responsibility. And when that charity was associated with Princess Diana, and the heat was turned on her son, words turned to action with brutal consequences. When the Diana Legacy Trust complained to the Charity Commission about Prince Harry's idea for an archway, something changed. But from the small beginnings of an internal evaluation to a very codified process. The question now, did the trust approve it? But only if the public watchdog overseeing UK charities agreed that it was legal, ethical and transparent. While the Charity Commission was no stranger to dodgy dealing and political wrangling in its oversight of charitable bodies across the UK, this was something quite different. After all, not only was the $40 million SVC a big deal, and it was, but so were the people behind it, and the risks they posed. Tens of thousands of pages of procedural notes, issues and inconsistencies which had been submitted in standard format were the first things that stained the Trust Commission relationship. Within a few weeks, a second window of review was opened which involved further consultations with the Department for Digital Culture Media and Sport, DCMS, the UK government department that deals with issues relating to cultural organisations in the UK and so-called heritage-linked charities. Senior analysts were given a few days to reanalyze the entire Arch starter proposal with a fine-toothed comb, according to insiders. Though the team is well-versed in navigating the peer review process, it noted what was missing rather than anything that was surprising about the paper. It was the dishonesty which was not immediately clear as such, but rather the alarming inaccuracy. Budget allocations were often unclear and organizational structures Byzantine. Invoicing and relationships could be hard to follow, with intermediaries, shell organizations or US-based consulting firms making it difficult to link one actor in the supply chain directly back to drug lords. The proposed deliverables, including media content licensing, had one major problem, multiple sources tell Axios. The Archway production arm was designed to produce content in line with the causes of Diana, but its ownership structure remained up in the air. The Diana Legacy Trust was said to have rights, but whether used in a commercial manner is also unclear. This created a lot of anxieties due to the ambiguity. At the heart of the matter was whether money raised in Diana's name for good causes could inadvertently promote a private brand. Regulatory bodies had to scrutinize this critical question closely. Thus the offer ended up way more than initially intended. This led to Archwell's financials coming under review. Archwell Foundation operated as a non-profit under U.S. charity law, but UK laws are stricter around the segregation of commercial and non-profit activities. Discrepancies soon surfaced. Documents reviewed by the Los Angeles Times showed that some of Archwell contractors were working on projects related to the couple's new Netflix series at the same time. While legally legit, this smacked of an ongoing carousel of ad charities. Creative consultants swap Payout from charity B1 to composer and back again, oftentimes charging through multiple entities with overlapping tasks. For one, more concerns were raised about potential connections between the Diana-themed appointed leads and existing partnerships that stood to gain from the higher brand awareness. Moreover, the Commission found that one specific U.S.-based non-profit partner in the proposal was not just an established charity. The entity was co-owned by a media executive possessing clear Archwell commercial distribution connections. These were certainly not yet conclusive pieces of evidence. At the same time, more than enough was found to explain why the term used in several internalized government communications was irregular financial behavior, which was the topic of concern. At this point, the Commission had made their official request that all payments connected to the Diana Legacy Trust be frozen indefinitely. It was not yet public knowledge but would be soon. Even though the announcement had not yet been released, the news had already begun to spread within government bodies and regulatory organizations. Diana was on the brink of being at the center of a full-blown financial scandal. Whether he was being framed or not, Harry was no longer just the morning sun. Instead, he had somehow also become a central figure in a nationwide who should we trust funding controversy. According to rumors circulated amongst palace aides and advisors, alarm bells were ringing at Buckingham Palace. While the monarchy technically had no power over the Diana Legacy Trust, which was formed independent of royal oversight, it was becoming concerning. King Charles's advisors had been briefed, and sources also indicated that members of the royal household finance team had been made aware. Although the royal family publicly shied away from questions concerning the trust, the optics of one child's finances, another's name and responsibility, and the government's potential involvement in a scandal were considered disastrous by royal experts. Rumors further indicate that Prince William had distanced himself from the organization's operations. Now, after hearing his brother was at the center of a bizarre financial mismanagement scandal related to a valued organization, he was distraught. One top aide reported he's heartbroken. Harry could at least embarrass himself and not his mother's legacy. Meanwhile, the government pursued leads related to the implications of the freeze on Archwell UK-based operations. Despite being headquartered in the US, Archwell had multiple trademarks and intellectual property registered in the UK. British charity compliance law allowed that auditors could legally request to see any applicable contracts, licensing agreements, or email correspondence between Archwell UK employees and the trust. Auditors were not looking for criminal actions or accusing anyone of embezzlement, fraud. They were trying to determine if the proposed allocation of money risks falling foul of UK private benefit laws. More precisely, to ascertain whether any person or entity involved with the grant meets financial conflicts of interest requirements set forth in regulations for receiving federal funds. As the case unraveled and inscrutable layers of philanthropy in Redwood unfolded, a very sensitive nerve was touched upon in royal polyantropy. Reputation is everything in this world. Since perception actually matters, any perceived misdeed nearly can add up to decades of someone's very carefully built heritage being dismantled. Behold the son of Princess Diana, formerly the most beloved royal in the world, caught up in a web of financial intrigues, commercial scrutiny and charities left unfunded. Even as news just slowly started weirdly seeping out to certain media sideworlds, the damage was already rippling. Rumors started in the tabloid press of a governmental block on Harry's $40 million venture. Mentions of alleged improprieties in charity use here or there kind of half seep, half leak into reports as afterthoughts. All of a sudden, Arch became more than just a give to charity and make a change in the world concept. The offender, now unofficially evaluated participant, had morphed into something else, and the public feel started to change. Interpreted by some as Harry, an already punished prince, the outsider villain painted with a broad brush because he dared to step out of line once again. But to a significant number of others, especially in Britain, it validated years-long suspicions that the Sussexes' endeavours straddled ethical lines, casting doubt on the purity of their motives. In Archway, there were reports of a downcast mood among local staff who sounded angry and baffled and fearful about what was happening to the proposal. While there were grumblings that the government had been somewhat overreaching, there was a sotto voce recognition that perhaps the request for funding had not been sufficiently well formed. Harry was said to be livid behind closed doors, not only about the frozen funding, but also because of the inquisition by his family that he felt was a violation of trust. Diana's dying was a very sacred thing. It was a spiritual point and an emotional point to him. A group of guys, living in a distant city, just ordered the name of his mother, whom they surely never met before, would be licensed to use. It all seemed so preposterous thought. However, with regulators collecting evidence ahead of papering a response, it was never far from sight. This left the Sussexes in an uncomfortable limbo. Except no charges were imposed, and there was no public celebration. Just an eerie silence. A silence that seemed to stop time with their legacy. This was a lot more complex than just money. It became about story, curation of legacy, and entitlement to loss. What crossed the line is when, after government auditors raised questions about a plan brought forward by Arch, led to very public discussion, and as such motions of how well or poorly the Sussexes were managing their more complicated financial affairs. An inquiry which first was initially limited to a trust then expanded further. Harry and Meghan, finding the balance of transparency versus a paycheck? For Arch, really the altruistic power they depicted themselves as? Detractors began to mutter about the business operation that plies its royal trade under the guise of a charity empire. Although the Duke and Duchess of Sussex had claimed Arch existed largely as a non-profit rather than a money-making venture, an account that was tellingly more nuanced than any soundbite could capture soon emerged. Journalists, analysts, and watchdogs poured through public records, partnership disclosures, and business agreements, and picked up troubling threads. At the core of the conundrum was that Arch is two-sided. One was the USA-based non-profit side of our mission, that focused on charitable causes and advocacy, under the name Arch Foundation. Conversely, there were the corporate cousins Arch Productions and its Armageddon Archive AWA. In theory, these entities should have been quite different, but in practice their staff communications sometimes overlapped, and they used branding initiatives or media surfaces interchangeably. On the face of it, this merger might have seemed harmless. At a time when celeb philanthropy is hardly new, many were folding their media careers into their charity work. This overlap, however, was a gray zone for compliance officials and charity regulators, a potential minefield. The search for concern started with an investigation of the duty archives. While the foundation's status and its prominent placement on the UA campus was widely known, records provided to AL.com from a confidential source in 2011 showed little charitable giving by any measure when compared with the billions that both had announced were pledged or donated. A look at Arch Foundation's IRS Form 990, an annual document U.S. nonprofit organizations must file, revealed claims of only modest pledges and donations to charity for a foundation that already appeared poised in many ways as one of America's most generous foundations, reaching into million-dollar-plus coffers. The researchers were struck by the low levels of actual charitable uses, direct grants and help, which surprised some experts. The truth is, the foundation was still very young at that time and only a few years old. It faced logistical challenges because of the pandemic and the once again top-down staffing. A public used to taking this service for granted was less forgiving on edge. However, the considerable time delay from donation to action started to worry me. There were questions about the type of projects it was funding and where it was spending money. There was also an unclear staff issue on top of it all. The content credited several of the Arch Wall Foundation affiliated consultants in marketing and was produced by Arch Wall Productions. It was and is unclear what exactly their roles were to be. Some are called strategic advisors, others creative liaisons. In addition, some businesses that have been paid by the foundation currently reported up as financial structures of the firm or firms behind it owned or controlled by Mr. and Mrs. Whitehead were named in these early documents. This behavior was not illegal per se, but it clearly demonstrated the key worry of regulators, a conflict of interest. One of those companies, which allegedly aided in the development of Meghan's podcast series under Spotify, is said to have been given funding by Arch Wall Foundation. This suite of under the aegis agreement yields fixed another is earmarked as soundstage being ascendancy both to uplift women voices noble bundling outward, itself nice iterate in direst straight stage opening. However, it was aligned with a for-profit endeavor. Is it possible within that same framework for, say, a consultant to be funded by the non-profit to research themes of social impact and then use that research as a basis to develop content for a commercial podcast? Theoretically, yes. As it turned out, that was a little more complicated in practice. Subsequently, the Netflix deal followed. Valued at around $100 million, the deal with the Sussexes and the streaming service was billed as groundbreaking. A monarch and his consort spar over principles of human concern, compassion, and general social welfare. Still, the process of shooting was anything but uncomplicated. As Arch Wall Productions, we needed to lay the structure of operations, put teams together, converge minds, and build grounds-up content streams. And once more, the lines began to blur. Hundreds of internal documents showed that the production consultants on developing Netflix series had also previously worked with Arch Wall on foundation projects. Those responses attracted a series of questions about the exchange of resources, ideas, or personnel among philanthropic and commercial activities that were less certain. In addition, more detailed filings from the Arch Wall Foundation classified professional services under general umbrella categories. It was difficult for watchdog organizations as well have journalists to tell that media consultancy, strategic narrative production and impact communication were problematic catch-all labels. That was deemed to be too obscure. A host of non-profit watchdog groups issued public appeals for disclosures from March. They wanted detailed analysis of what was donated, grants awarded, partnerships with vendors and their administrations, e.g. internal security processes. The team at Arch Wall, meanwhile, said they abide by U.S. laws and are an open group. Still, critics said that simple compliance was not enough. Trust necessitated clarity. The situation escalated with the emergence online of leaked internal memos, reportedly written by a former Archway employee. These memos revealed internal frustrations over project delays, donor demands, and the struggle to maintain positive public relations despite operational inefficiencies, but their authenticity was not independently confirmed. A certain line in these supposed documents really got to me. The concise, seemingly mid-level project coordinator penned line, "Too many hats, not enough heads," struck a chord with plenty of folks. It implied that Arch Wall was jockeying a charity, corporation, media empire, self-care movement and global brand at once, administered by just two people shouldering enormous personal and institutional burdens. The Diana Legacy Trust freeze, meanwhile, had become a big talking point. If one of the most respected charitable trusts in the UK felt Arch Wall's financial structure was too opaque, how could smaller funders, strategic partners, or governments feel confident their support would not be used as a vehicle to burnish brand Sussex? Several press followed with extensive investigations, including analyses of Archwell finances, staff connections and project timelines, as well as maps showing how donations were used. From this point forward, every financial transaction of Archwell was under a microscope. A few supporters did take to Facebook to defend the organization, even though they were outnumbered by those who criticized. Some non-profit leaders publicly declared that the scrutiny of Archwell looked politically motivated because of its leadership. Many new foundations, especially those linked to recognizable individuals, have a difficult time initially, they argued. They noted Archwell's launch, new initiatives from partnerships with World Central Kitchen and Global Citizen to support communities in advance of the investment counseling service fees and mental health awareness program that has so far reached millions of different corners around the world. Some undefined fuzziness is to be expected out of the gate for a young foundation. A specialist highlighted the need for more transparency to be defined, diversified, and improved in future. However, a big question did indeed remain: why did Harry ask for so much of the Diana Legacy Trust when Archwell already had huge backing from power players? For some within, this was not just a $40 million, it was recognition and emotional support. While a new project, the Arch was supported by many in which Harry is clearly the newcomer, but it was also his continuation of his mother's legacy with an evolution of himself, but not at the expense of forgetting where he came from. Regrettably, the anticipated validation never came. But following the refusal and requests for proof of his mother, such financial small print became what felt like a deep rejection by the same institutions that Harry had faith would respect his mother's legacy. Whispers began that other groups were beginning to quietly distance themselves from Archwell. According to a statement from an educational nonprofit called Pending Clarity, the company who had hoped to become part of our joint initiative actually put that effort on hold, seemingly because it was bad timing. In the UK, a mental health advocacy group removed Archwell's logo from a partnership banner on its website and later said their partnership had expired. The opacity of Archwell's finances had clearly gone from a governance issue to a tarnished reputation. The Sussexes were not deterred by the setback. Meghan kept a fairly low public profile, however she did continue working on projects in the background. Harry, too, was staunch in his opinion that Archwell was set to democratize, not monetize, and told critics who didn't understand contemporary philanthropy where they could stick it. But as the supporters and critics continued their tussle, one thing that could not be ignored was how at every step finances had begun to overtake genuine service with an increasing reliance on self-service. The Diana Legacy Trust rejected Prince Harry's $40 million proposal, and the news reached Buckingham Palace, throwing them into new challenges. There was no immediate cheer for one side and outrage against the other, barrels slammed down by great silent walls. No, what passed between them was a long silence, a tense, gripping quiet that spoke louder than words ever could. That was the silence of grief, tension, tiredness, and worst of all, betrayal. The royal family had been dealing with the fallout from me, for years of me, the interviews, the Netflix specials, the tell-all memoirs, and all those lucrative podcast deals. Every prior release had resonated through the corridors of the monarchy, but this was something new. Diana, and cutting so close to the bone within the palace. No briefings had been scheduled to talk about that trust issue, there were no official statements, and not a word from King Charles or Prince William to the press. Still, whispers were passed around the palace walls, not to the tabloids, but amongst themselves. No one is perfect, not even the royal family, and Diana was an especially thorny subject, reflecting that. For years as king, Charles has been burdened by the fact that he was once married to Diana. He shared an intricate relationship with his sons, especially with Harry. His priority had been to repair or, at a minimum, to hold on to the wreckage left behind by the Sussexes. He declined to speak out in public, even as Harry's memoir threatened to expose more damaging revelations. However, His demeanor is said to have changed when he was discreetly told the Diana Legacy Trust had placed a large sum on hold over arch-related worries. According to palace insiders, he was not responding with anger. "We just find his Charles fatigue refreshing." The trust was no longer just a charity, it had become part of the royalty's grieving process in the wake of Diana's death. It endeavored to commemorate her life, protect her dignity and create something lasting in her memory. "I myself could not help but feel like we were ripping open a wound that had never stopped bleeding, seeing this legacy muddled in controversy, financial ruin, regulatory battles and his son." Charles observed a period of dignity and silence in his sorrow. William took to the airwaves. The Trust's Land and Nature Program Manager, Sam Bridgewater, told The Independent, "While the involvement of Prince Charles as a patron is greatly appreciated by the organization, he has no day-to-day input or participation in decisions relating to grant-making." 2. It was also where his son William was a longtime chair. Unlike Prince Charles, William had been active with the trust, attending events, engaging with trustees and assessing grant proposals. So he was the heir, but also one hell of a good son who always tried to do his mother proud, not by showboating, but through serious service. The news that Harry had reportedly asked the trust to fund his new life with $40 million, only for his request to be turned down over fears of mismanagement, landed on William like a thunderbolt from heaven. He was devastated by it, sources close to the palace said. He had long made peace with his brothers receding into a slightly more independent role, one that even at its most distant seemed less like betrayal. While unsettled, this felt disproportionate. It was as though an intrusion had occurred, reshaping a protected legacy they vowed to safeguard within palace walls. The typical Windsor's approach of silence was pondered, yet privately William reportedly felt a profound sense of bereavement, not only regarding the trust dispute but also the growing awareness that he and his brother now inhabited divergent paths. For William, Diana's memory was honored through discreet acts like shelter visits, advocating for mental health issues, and pioneering initiatives uniting minds. In contrast, for Harry, it appeared her remembrance was viewed as a brand to revitalize, expand globally, and repackage through media activism and public crusades. Though sharing the same mother, they narrated her story in strikingly different manners. This disparity was not solely a philosophical divide but deeply personal. William, according to indications, took the trust decision as validating his worries that however well-meaning, Harry's ventures were susceptible to turmoil Diana once strove to shield her sons from, like relentless publicity, boundary erosion, and trauma commercialization within Clarence House. King Charles's chief counselors launched a review of the Diana Legacy Trust's lawful position. As the monarchy aimed to avoid entanglement in the controversy despite the trust's independence, apprehensions lingered about how the scandal could impact public perception of the royal family. Concerns persisted that media connections between the issue and discourses about privilege and hypocrisy could reflect negatively, especially on the king. Always cautious of Diana's legacy, Queen Camilla reportedly advised further distancing and resolute avoidance of personal conflicts to endure as the monarchy had endured worse. The toll on family emotions, however, was unmistakable. Behind-the-scenes efforts attempted to reconcile the situation. A senior aide supposedly contacted a Harry staff member to discreetly discuss easing tensions between the brothers, though not regarding finances. Sources indicated the suggestion was politely declined from Harry's perspective. He felt wrongly accused, viewing the standoff as institutional wariness governed by charity laws, not moral judgment. Consequently, the divide deepened as the silence persisted. Within Kensington Palace, reports stated William walked the gardens alone one evening, observers noting he avoided meetings while opting to contemplate solitarily. It is said William rarely shows grief, but concerning his mother, it bubbles beneath, some speculating he viewed the trust and its legacy as one of few remaining Diana connections, though households, visions and narratives now diverged, but a link through her still shared. Even this relationship had now fractured for the monarchy, making the scandal not only painful but ill-timed. King Charles was in the midst of carefully reshaping a modern royal identity, balancing respect with tradition, when Diana's name emerged in headlines yet again. Rather than a beacon of hope, it became a source of financial squabble, precisely the story the palace tried to avoid. Despite internal disorder, no public statements were issued, not by Charles, not by William, not by the trust. Silence reigned, steering clear of acknowledging fractures that risked undermining Diana's cherished legacy as a devoted mother. Observant palace employees detected subtle shifts. William abruptly cancelled a visit to a mental health facility backed by the trust, and Charles sidestepped a briefing on a youth initiative planned in Diana's honor. Future memorial occasions were discreetly postponed within royal circles. These delicate gestures spoke volumes. No official declaration was necessary to indicate irreparable damage had occurred. Even though the populace stayed unaware of behind-the-scenes struggles, tension hung heavy in the air, echoing shattered remnants of something once whole. Perhaps the most insightful comment came from a seasoned palace colleague who, when queried about the family's reaction, simply remarked they felt worn, tired of battles, worn from seeing her memory exploited in headlines. Such misuse betrayed the profound significance Diana held, especially within the sunlit walls of the California residence now known as Harry's home. Across a grand oak desk inside, Prince Harry firmly grasped a letter bearing the Diana Legacy Trust's emblem. The formal message contained succinct yet weighty words. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more breaking royal updates. Your thoughts matter. Join the conversation in the comments below.